Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the July 18 meeting of the Ann Arbor City Council. If you're able, please rise and join us for a moment of silence, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Would our clerk please call the roll of council?
Councilmember Hayner?
Here.
Councilmember Dish?
Here.
Councilmember Griswold?
Here.
Councilmember Song?
Here.
Councilmember Grant?
Here.
Councilmember Medina?
Here.
Mayor Taylor?
Here.
Councilmember Iyer? Absent. Councilmember Nelson?
Here.
Councilmember Briggs?
Here.
Councilmember Ramlawi?
Present.
We have a quorum.
May I have a motion, please, to approve the agenda? Moved by Councilmember Medina, seconded by Councilmember Dish. Discussion of the agenda. All in favor? Opposed? The agenda is approved. Do we have any communications today from our city administrator?
No, we don't.
We have no introductions today, and so we roll on straight into public comment reserve time. Public comment reserve time is an opportunity for members of the public to speak to council and the community about matters of municipal interest. To speak at public comment reserve time, one needs to have signed up in advance by contacting our city clerk. Speakers both here and online have 3 minutes in which to speak, so please pay close attention to the time. Here, you will note the lights, and online, our clerk will notify you when 30 seconds are remaining and when your time has expired. When your time has expired, please conclude your remarks and cede the floor. Our council rules require that only one person speak at any given time, and speaking times are not delegable. Our first speaker today is Brandon Dimcheff.
Hello. Hi, Brandon Dimcheff, Ward 4. I'm here speaking about C2 today. There are a lot of people here to talk about C2. Many of them are more qualified than me, so I'll keep this brief. We have too much land dedicated to car storage in Ann Arbor. Vast parking lots with their impervious surface lay nearly empty all day next to strip malls and office buildings along State, Eisenhower Stadium, Plymouth, and Washtenaw. This is a profound waste of space in a city that desperately needs more housing, and the environmental consequences have been disastrous. Thankfully, with transit corridor zoning, we've started to fix our mistakes in a few areas, and we should be able to redevelop vacant asphalt into something more useful. C2 is the next logical step. Let's live up to our values and H20 goals and stop forcing people to build parking for an auto-centric world that's killing the planet. Please support C2 and vote for a better, more ecologically friendly future for Ann Arbor. Thanks.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Jerome Johnson.
Good evening. I want to speak in support of item DC2 on tonight's agenda. It's a resolution to pull together representatives of the many different policies that guide city staff on issues such as transportation, energy use, sidewalks, and pedestrian safety to see if there are conflicts in the guidance they provide to city staff. I will provide one example of a policy conflict that illustrates the importance of doing a review. Last year, the Racquet Club of Ann Arbor submitted a proposal to the building department to replace the pump house for its swimming pool. Building is to begin in early September of this year. Guided by the Complete Streets policy, the building department is requiring the club to build, at its expense, 3 5-foot wide concrete sidewalks on club property. Total length of the new sidewalks is 268 yards, longer than 2.5 football fields. The sidewalks do not connect to any other sidewalks within Ann Arbor Hills. I believe there's a conflict between the guidance provided by the Complete Streets policy and the A20 policy. The first version of the Complete Streets was approved by Council in 2011, and it guides the building department to require sidewalks to be added to any building projects that don't already have sidewalks on their property. There's no comprehensive plan prioritizing where sidewalks are most needed. The A20 policy, which was adopted in 2019, commits the city to drastically reduce carbon emissions to zero by 2030. But cement from which sidewalks are made generates significant amounts of carbon. In fact, cement makes up 8% of all carbon dioxide worldwide. You might think that the RC sidewalks won't contribute that much CO2, but consider that the nearest sidewalks in the neighborhood to which the club's sidewalks would need to connect to make walking safer are a mile from the club. Building a network of sidewalks in a subdivision that has very few sidewalks at present will require a great deal of cement. course, the city's not going to completely stop building sidewalks because of the 820 policy. But the city could be prudent in choosing where to add sidewalks in light of its commitment to reduce carbon emissions. The strategy of complete streets policy adds sidewalks wherever building is happening. More prudent policy would add sidewalks only in places where sidewalks are needed to move residents safely from home to stores or places of employment. The Racket Club is not one of those places. City Council still has a chance to remove the sidewalk requirement from the Racket Club project before work begins in early September. 10 months ago, the City Council denied the club a waiver of the sidewalk requirement in a close vote, 6-4. The council could revisit the decision in light of current knowledge of the environmental impact of the project and the limited need for sidewalks at or near the club. I'm leaving a document with the city clerk that provides more details on the project. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Mojan Savabiasafami.
Hello, Ann Arbor. I'm here to encourage everyone out there to get out there and vote the mayor and his slate out. They pretend they work in our favor and that they're serving us, but they have a record, which we can see. They serve the contributors, fully serve them, not us. And I know that because in the past 20 years, this town has become more segregated, less equitable, more polluted, and you name it. They want you to believe you live in a great town. It has the potential to be a great town, but it isn't. What we need to do is to vote them out and vote in people like me who are completely independent. They talk and act in favor of working people in this country and in this town, and they have a record of anti-racist. I do have those things. When I'm elected, my talk will not be fluff like this city council. I will work against laws that make $15 minimum wage impossible. I will work against laws that make public housing illegal. If these laws exist, and they do, it's a shame. We should push and change them so we can get the public, the working public, not your friends, the rich bitch ones. We should get those for the public. We should focus on minding the needs of the public, not your campaign contributors with billions and billions of dollars in the bank. I will do all that. And another thing, you know how they like to say this town is a diverse town and it's an equitable town? It's a lie. This town is now more segregated than it was 20 years ago when I came here. And equitability? Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? People with small means are getting pushed out of this town. So we don't have a diverse town and we don't have an equitable town, but we can get it. I'll tell you how. University of Michigan promised 50 years ago, and all these people have been here as at least 20 years, promised 10% black enrollment. Today, they have a measly 4.3% black enrollment. These people have watched the number of black students at Michigan dwindle and go down. They've done nothing about it. They could have easily said to the university, look, we offer you a lot of stuff. You give us this. We want an equitable, a diverse town. None of them have ever said that. So when they tell you they're not racist, don't believe them, because they are. Because their record shows they are. When I am on this city council, I will challenge the University of Michigan. I will push so that they honor their promise that they gave 50 years ago, 10% black enrollment. If we bring 10% black enrollment to University of Michigan, in the next 10 years, we could expect to have real equity and real diversity. Vote the mayor and his slate out. They're liars, and we don't need them.
Our next speaker is Danelle Weich.
They ditched you.
Mr. Weich, go ahead.
Can you all hear me?
Yes, we can.
Good evening, Council. I'm Donnell Weich, a resident on Silo Church in the 4th Ward. I'm speaking in support of CA 11. I want to start by thanking city staff for recommending the expansion of Barton Drive to more uses than just car transit and car storage. I want to encourage council to have city staff install a truly protected bike lane now, not when street cleaning and plowing equipment is available for purchase at some later date. Paint is not a buffeted bikeway. If you don't believe me, I would love to take any of you who are willing on an e-bike tour of this area so that you can experience firsthand what biking in painted bikeways would feel like along this fast-moving, narrow roadway. A protected bikeway helps us inch closer to our citywide goal of Vision Zero. And I'm so glad that you mentioned Vision Zero. During last week's implementation committee meeting, I learned in our city between 2015 and 2019, we had some 309 cars crash into pedestrians. Of those 309 crashes, 31 were critical and 5 fatal. Today, at 5th and Liberty, I was almost hit by a car that was speeding to run a red light. So I am mindful of just how fragile life is, and I am grateful to be alive to address you now. The roadway on Barton, as you approach Pontiac Trail, is very narrow, and paint is not a buffer, nor is it a barrier. As I biked this part of the roadway today, I had to take up the center lane in order to protect myself because there is not enough space for 3 feet between me and a car. All of this to say, please put the protected bikeway in now, not later when the equipment becomes available. The cost of free on-street parking should not come as a result of a human life. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Eric Zecher.
Mr. Mayor, at some point I'd like to address that. I'd like to understand what's going on there. I know that we're not allowed to address Planning Commission, but I was under the impression
Hello,
that
is this
planning
my
commissioners
time?
were.
Council member, that's perfect for council communications. Mr. Zecher.
Yeah, you got my name correct too. Good job. This is Eric Zecher. I'd like to ask all of you to view some of the changes before you tonight through the lens of equity and also of climate change. First of all, what the previous caller was just talking about, CA11, Barton Drive really needs to be better equipped for pedestrians and people who are riding bikes. A lot of people can't afford to drive through this area, and there's a lot of crashes in this area. So we really need to better protect the people who are already using it and encourage other people to get outside their cars too. This area could really, really use some protected bike lanes, and it's already something that was studied in the previous Lower Town Mobility Study. This is exactly what they recommended us to do. So I think it's great that we're considering it. And then next, C2, eliminating parking minimums. There's so many reasons to be excited about this. Anybody who's visited a walkable community knows how great it is for people of all ages, of all abilities, of all incomes. So it's really something that we need to strive for. And while eliminating parking minimums will not get us all the way there, we won't get there unless we eliminate parking minimums. There's no way that we can transform our city into a better place to live and still require these businesses to put in whatever we determine they need for parking. Some businesses are still going to put in parking, but some are going to decide they don't need parking. And we're going to see some really creative, really unique uses of these near neighborhood areas to help create walkable communities outside of the downtown area. So I am super excited about that. That's basically all I have to do with those two, so I urge you to vote yes. And if I do have time, I also wanted to extend a huge thank you to our city clerk's office. They've done a really, really good job with the upcoming election. We've gotten our absentee ballot applications on time. We've gotten our absentee ballots on time. And I just really, really can't applaud them enough. They've done just a great job of making sure our democracy works. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Adam Goodman.
Hi, my name is Adam Goodman. I'm calling in from Ward 5 tonight. I'm also really excited to see C2, the parking amendments, the UDC tonight. I think a lot of cities are realizing that overbuilt parking lots are really one of their greatest enemies in trying to achieve many of the goals that we share, things like housing affordability, equity, climate change, and really just being a vibrant and creative place to live. There's a pretty simple reason for this ultimately, and that is that parking lots are a really inefficient use of urban space. And so it's not only that they displace space that could be used for other things like housing, retail, or even parks, it's that they drive these amenities further apart where they do exist. So if you've got a giant parking lot between buildings, then if you're trying to get around on foot or by bike, it increases the distance that you have to go to get from place to place. And also these parking lots themselves tend to be really hostile environments for people who are on foot. Sometimes they're downright dangerous. So the effect that this has is it forces people to drive more, even if they wouldn't otherwise choose to do that. It's a vicious cycle that we really need to break ourselves out of. And this is especially because our community has set goals, like in the 820 plan, we have a goal to reduce vehicle miles traveled by 50%. And we have a Vision Zero goal to make sure that our city is safe and comfortable for all modes of transportation, including biking and walking. Now, tonight, what we're talking about in particular is minimum parking requirements. Except for TC1, this, as I understand it, is not going to place any restrictions on developers. It's just going to stop requiring them to build parking even when it's clearly not needed. So we'll still have parking, but maybe we can stop overdoing it so much. And another advantage is that I think many cities have done this, and I think many of them have seen this, is that removing this requirement will make it a lot easier to have creative and adaptive reuses in some of our sort of small neighborhood businesses. So I'll give you an example. Some folks I know have been trying to open up a small neighborhood bar in the Lower Town area. And they've been working on this for years, and they've almost given up several times. And the reason they almost gave up, it was the parking minimums that our city has. Now, eventually, they did manage to come up with a proposal and go to the Zoning Board of Appeals and get a variance. But this whole experience makes you wonder how many similar projects have just died on the vine because these barriers seemed insurmountable. We really need to make this easier if we're going to have a creative and vibrant community. And so I think, removing parking minimums would be great. I do kind of hope that in the future, the city will look at enforcing parking maximums in all zones, not just TC1. But for now, I think this would be a great step, and I hope you will all vote to advance it. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Daniel Adams.
Daniel Adams? Go ahead.
Hi, Council. I'm calling in tonight to support C2, which is the resolution eliminating the UDC's minimum parking requirements. I think this is a sensible, common sense change that will give everybody, business owners, developers, residents, more flexibility to determine the best and most efficient use of real property in Ann Arbor and prevent the creation of more underutilized surface parking. If we had a shortage of that parking, these minimums might make policy sense, but that's not the crisis that we face, and it's not any one of the several crises that we face. We have acres and acres of poorly used off-street parking in the middle of a housing crisis and a climate crisis. We have areas of the city that are prone to flooding and water management problems. Parking minimums that make it more expensive to build and develop and use the limited land that we have. And land use rules, like all public policy, have to adapt to meet the moment. I want to take a moment here to address the question from Councilmember Nelson in the agenda response memo, which asked, quote, why would we make this amendment prior to review and overhaul of the city's comprehensive land use plan? This question, which is posed a lot, has it exactly backwards. Council members, as elected lawmakers, should have ideas on how to improve city land use policy and should want to debate those ideas on the merits, not by reference to an arcane, out-of-date guidance document, and should want to implement those ideas as long as they find colorable, good faith support in the existing plan. Council members should be looking for reasons to govern. This question seems to be searching for a reason not to govern. The plan is a guidance document that we're required by state law to have, but that's all it is. It's not meant to constrain the council from setting popular policy. But that is how it is almost always used, as a cudgel, as a reason to do nothing. And it's frustrating to see it so commonly invoked to reinforce the status quo, to bog us down in process rather than aggressively work to set policy to address the problems that we have. These same folks who invoke this plan for this purpose often get frustrated when they're labeled as small c local conservatives, but the label seems apt. We elect council members to govern, and council members should want to govern, not table policy discussions and changes for months or years while we work on an update to a guidance document. That's a doctor telling a sick patient, I know what ails you. I have a great idea on how to cure you, but I can't provide that care until I update the textbook.
30
So-
seconds.
Let's update the plan. Let's do that. But in parallel, governance doesn't stop. Please move forward on C2 and all the other changes that we think are going to make the city a better place to live. Thanks.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Michelle Hughes.
Michelle Hughes, go ahead.
Hi, I'm also here to talk about the parking. I wanted to talk about, I have a girlfriend who lives in an apartment complex that is near Plymouth Road, and it's along a major bus route, and it's near North Campus. And a lot of the people who live there don't feel that they need to own cars. And you can tell because when you go to the parking lot there, they have a whole bunch of these covered parking spaces that were built at the apartment complex, and they're all empty or very nearly empty. There'll be a little shed for 15 cars, and there'll be 2 cars parked in there. Then the one next to it will be completely empty. Meanwhile, the bike rack there will be completely full, and a lot of people are storing their bikes in their apartments, so it would be a lot more full. There's a lot of people there who just use the bus and don't use a bike or a car. And, so I would think, hey, it seems like it would be easy to predict that this would happen when they were building this, because it's along a major bus route, it's near North Campus, it's in walking distance from a grocery store. Why didn't the developers just build more housing there and less parking? Because it's clear that we have a huge demand for apartments in Ann Arbor, and we have, as is clear from the parking lot, at this apartment complex, we do not have a huge demand that's unmet for parking. So why didn't the developer just say, oh, well, I'll just build more apartments and less parking? Well, the reason they didn't is because they couldn't, because we told them that it was illegal to do that. They had to build that parking even though nobody wants it. And if we continue to have parking minimums, then that's what we're telling all future developers. We're saying, hey, I know that this doesn't work for your business. I know that this doesn't work for our community, but we want you to do it anyway. And we should instead pass C2 tonight to remove these parking minimums and let future developers match what it is that we need, which is housing. And all of the other things that make our community, because we need to be building a city full of destinations, not a city full of parking that doesn't have any destinations attached to it. So please pass C2. Thanks.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Jim Pike.
Hi, I was going to call in, but I just happened to be downtown, so here I am. I live in Ward 5, and I wanted to speak regarding DC1, whose title I will now read. Resolution directing the city administrator to expand compliance evaluations and to continue to provide annual reports regarding contractor compliance with prevailing wage requirements. So first I want to say, gosh, that's quite a mouthful. But more importantly, I want to point out that while there's been talk in this election season about government transparency issues, often done as an excuse to whisper or even shout conspiracy theories about imagined corruption, one of the most important aspects of transparency has to do with ensuring that policies enacted become and remain policies enforced. Sometimes that process requires that more policies be enacted or renewed, and this is one of those times. As someone who has some experience with the often arcane process of keeping job titles aligned with job duties, as well as that process of setting and adjusting pay rates over periods of many years in a large institution, I am very glad to see this effort to continue the enforcement of contractor compliance policies that were first enacted several years ago. Doing this during election season also gives it a level of visibility it might not otherwise have. That's a good thing too. Even though sometimes government policymaking can involve big, splashy initiatives, at other times it can involve stuff that might seem kind of dull. Even dull stuff can affect a lot of people in a city as large as Ann Arbor, though. So I'm glad to see that Council is willing to engage with the nuts and bolts of government transparency the way we see in this resolution. Thanks, and keep up the good work.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Elizabeth Hunter.
Ms. Hunter, phone number 877. Press *6 to unmute your phone. Go ahead.
Hi, strange to say it, but our not-so-large town has a political machine. It's powerful and aims to eliminate any dissenting or even questioning voices from City Council. This developer's machine marshals unheard-of sums of money from outside the wards being contested and even outside the city and the county. 4 years ago, according to his campaign filings, Mayor Taylor held a fundraiser at Birmingham's Posh Townsend Hotel and garnered 10 contributions of $2,000 each from lawyers and developers. One of them was promoting successfully a large development project in Ann Arbor. That's $20,000 in one evening. The machine appoints citizens to boards and commissions where they earn their credits by promoting the machine's policies and then are eligible to be selected by the machine to run for City Council. Local development interests seek massive favors from Planning Commission and Council. Jeff Hauptman of Oxford donates generously to the machine's candidates and PACs that support them or vilify their opponents. The latest striking manifestation is a string of yard signs currently in front of his properties along Eisenhower and Industrial. This is the least Hauptman does to support a machine that has upzoned dozens of his properties along State Street, permitting vastly larger developments, but neither requiring or incentivizing any contribution to our alleged affordable housing goals, nor incorporating features that would contribute to our alleged sustainability goals. These practices exemplify the pay-to-play practices that are typical of the most ruthless political machine. Winning elections is not the only way the machine stifles democracy. Once Taylor regained control in 2020, it promptly reversed a reform that would require major proposed street reconfigurations to be reported to council. The result is the staff can spring changes without notice, eliminating opportunity for neighbors and users of the streets to have input. The machine also rammed through a policy originally promoted by real estate interests and Rick Snyder and the Republican-dominated legislature. It allows the machine-appointed planning commission, including an Oxford employee, to exercise final approval of major developments without any input from the elected city council or from the public. Developers should be grateful, the public should not. And here's a famous quote,
30
politics
seconds.
is the art of preventing people from taking part in affairs that properly concern them. End of quote. The machine has mastered that art, and democracy in Ann Arbor is being subverted. The quote is from French intellectual Paul Valéry. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there communications from council? Councilmember Griswold.
I had the TV on in the background today, and I kept hearing a term that resonated with me, and that was systemic failure. We have absolutely awesome employees, but we frequently have failures. One example was on Getty's Road, where a young child was killed a few years ago. According to Vision Zero, you don't just look at the reasons why, the causes of that crash, you look at the environment there and you try to improve it and make it as safe as possible. We didn't do that, and just recently, another child was hit. Fortunately, it was not a serious injury, but now we have 2 crashes of our children in the same location. And I am pleading tonight with our city administrator to please take action. Don't send this through the bureaucratic process. I have 2 paper boxes at home of memos and studies about pedestrian safety, many of which the improvements never happen. So please, let's take action on this Getty's Avenue. Dangerous, dangerous site. It's dangerous for cars. I was almost hit tonight when I was just pulling out after looking at it. Good news. I'm continuing to work on the U of M workforce housing project. In the last couple of weeks, I have talked to a couple of labor union leaders, and they are also supportive. So at this point, I have not received any negative feedback. And the last thing is I attended the appeals court hearing, the AG versus Gelman, about a week and a half ago, and I can tell you, thank God we have the EPA, because
Councilmember?
our state cannot protect us. Thank you.
Further communication from council. Councilmember Hayner.
Thanks. I don't know how most folks in the public probably already know this, but I'm just wanted to say I'm sorry that we're losing our fine police chief, Michael Cox, to the city of Boston. He's going to be the Boston Police Commissioner. And, I was just kind of reviewing things that have happened since I've been here on council, and I think the hire of Chief Cox and the attitude that he brought to this community and this force was a welcome one. And, I'm sorry that he's going to be leaving, but I certainly understand it's an offer you can't turn down, especially being a Boston man himself. So thank you for your service, Chief Cox, short as though it was. And hopefully some of the things that he set in place here will continue. I consistently heard from residents and downtown business owners how they had noticed a change in the police force, how they were happy to see them out of their cars and integrating with the community and trying to do a better job. And so I think they're doing that better job, and I thank them for that. And, you may have seen me walking back and forth and talking to some folks during public comment. I'm not sure if it's proper or not. I have a concern when, folks on Planning Commission have a lot of authority, and this body has granted them even more authority, probably the greatest authority they've ever had in the history of the city. And so council members are not allowed we're prohibited from our rules by representing ourselves in front of certain boards and commissions to not give the appearance of impropriety or using having excessive favor or authority over these commissions. And so I was sort of surprised to hear a planning commissioner down here speaking to council on behalf of something that planning commission had sent forward. I wasn't sure that was proper. And maybe it is, and maybe it isn't, but it's certainly an odd turn. I don't think I have ever seen that in my almost 4 years here on council. So that's what that was all about. I was just checking with our clerk to see if that was actually allowed under our council rules. So thank you.
Councilmember Song.
I just want to alert folks to a resolution that ICPOC, our Police Oversight Commission, had pulled together regarding an RFP that the city has out with concerning public engagement around our unarmed crisis response work. ICPOC is asking the community to consider 3 clauses, which is 1, that they're requesting that unarmed response should operate independently from police and without a police co-response. 2, the development of the program should be guided by people from communities who are disproportionately policed. For example, those who use drugs, are without housing, in poverty, have mental health issues, or are BIPOC. 3, the program should include linkages to a range of social services such as mental health, substance use, transportation, conflict resolution, housing, and others. So this is a resolution that was brought before the commission, and residents are concerned about how we conduct this next steps in bringing this program together, and I think that they're reasonable concerns, and I hope my colleagues will consider that as we undergo this process for a new program. Thank you.
Further communication from council. Councilmember Radina.
Thank you, Mayor. Briefly, I just wanted to draw the public's attention to the fact that the Renters Commission will be meeting for a second time this month. They called a special meeting for July 26th. That meeting will be at 6 p.m. and it's a Zoom meeting, so folks can participate from home. But one of the topics that is expected to be discussed is a proposal on right to renew. And so I just wanted to make sure folks were aware of that because this new body is getting right to work. Thanks.
Further discussion? Pardon me, further communication? I'd like to request confirmation of the following appointment that was presented to you for your consideration at the July 5, 2022 regular session to the Transportation Commission. Peter Hauk. May I have a motion, please? Moved by Councilmember Briggs, seconded by Councilmember Adina. Discussion? All in favor? Opposed? It is approved. I'd like to recommend the following nomination for your consideration to the Zoning Board of Appeals. Christina Glusak. Further, would like to propose a resolution to appoint a non-registered elector, Nicholas Ramel, to the Renters Commission, if you may, please, in a one-step appointment process. His appointment was requested a fair bit ago, but it slipped through the cracks, and so now we'd like to hustle and bustle to get him on the commission right now. Moved by Councilmember Adina, seconded by Councilmember Nelson. Discussion? All in favor? Opposed? It is approved with 11 council members present. 8. It is approved with 10 council members present, all voting the affirmative, thus satisfying the 8-vote requirement. We now have before us the consent agenda. May I have a motion, please, to approve the consent agenda? Moved by Councilmember Dish, seconded by Councilmember Song. Discussion of the consent agenda. Councilmember Hayner.
Thanks. I just wanted CA 11 to come off for some brief discussion. Thank you.
Further discussion? All in favor? Opposed? The consent agenda is approved with the exception of CA 11 with 10 council members present, all voting in the affirmative, thus satisfying the 8-vote requirement with respect to CA 12. CA 11, resolution to prohibit on-street parking on both sides of Barton Drive from Northside Avenue to Pontiac Trail, moved by Councilmember Hayner, seconded by Councilmember Dish. Discussion, please, of CA 11. Councilmember Hayner.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. So I just wanted to talk about this briefly. This is obviously our neck of the woods. I think we're probably about equidistant from this little stretch of bike lanes, Councilwoman Dish and I. When I bought my house on Pontiac Trail 26 years ago, we had on-street parking, and it was a 25-mile-an-hour residential street across from a couple schools. And when on-street parking was removed to create bike lanes, it became a 40-mile-an-hour street and a thoroughfare, quite frankly, for a lot of commuting in the hospital and so on. And, we use the bike lanes and we appreciate them, and we've had 25 years of working around not having street parking when we have people over. Really about 8 years, I think it's been. And, that's okay. But when you ask the folks who are actually affected by this change, they almost to the last one said they would prefer to have the parking on the street because they've seen the way that it has slowed down traffic in this little section. And because the body had seen fit to put bike lanes on both sides of it, and this is a missing connector, of course, this should fill in. But I was just working on that block for a few days, and I have seen so many near misses with pedestrians on this new crosswalks that are in that section. I just don't even know what to say about that as cars go faster and faster. And we had one with a neighbor, had a confrontation with a car where he kind of did the slap on the hood because they wouldn't stop for him and screaming at them, "Don't you know what a crosswalk means?" And obviously they don't. And so I'm not sure that's going to change in this commuter stretch. And so I wish the bicyclists a safe voyage through here, and I'm sorry for the vast majority of residents who asked to maintain parking in this area. That'll be going away, and it'll be replaced with a bike lane, and we can only hope that it doesn't have the same impact on that section of traffic as it had in front of my house, because it's been really a speeding disaster since we took those street parking away. It's unfortunate, and I'm glad the bikers are safe, but we're not quite striking the right balance. That's all I wanted to say.
Councilmember Dish.
So I wanted to speak to the numbers on public support for installing bike lanes on both sides of Barton. There was extensive public engagement around this question, and an A2 open survey of the neighborhood. So that is it's not only the street that parking is on, but it's the nearby housing in Ward 1. So the open survey of the neighborhood, 65.6% of 67 people supported removing the parking and having bike lanes on both sides of the street. The Ann Arbor open survey of Ward 1 in its entirety, 133 people responded to that, and 73.1% of them supported removing the parking. So if we're talking about Ward 1 alone and the neighborhood of this that is served by this area, we have very strong support. 9 affected homeowners, 89% of 9 affected homeowners objected to removing parking on both sides of Barton. So if I look at the numbers, it looks like there's overwhelming support, and I'm not even giving you the citywide A2 open survey, because let's just talk about what the people who are there, even though there are many people who use this area because it's a critical connector to a number of very frequently used bike paths, and it will be a critical connector to the B2B when we do the underpass there. So it's been a contentious issue, but I believe that this was an instance where the people living immediately adjacent were overwhelmingly unsupportive, but people broadly in the neighborhood and broadly in the ward are supportive. I ride this stretch to work. I will feel better when there's a bike lane. It is very congested. I don't think anyone's ever going to go 40 on it. I understand and agree that they do go 40 on Pontiac, and I don't like that either. The only way we're going to solve either of those problems is to close the exit there. I don't think that's ever going to happen. So I want us to build the infrastructure that mark this as a multimodal route. And this is exactly what we're doing. And I understand that there will be protected bike lanes as soon as the city acquires the equipment to sweep and plow the bike lanes. And so Mr. Weich, who is perfectly allowed to address council as himself, not to speak for the Planning Commission, was perfectly reasonable in asking for protected bike lanes right now. I personally would be a little bit worried about having protected bike lanes if there's no equipment to sweep the glass out of them or to plow the snow out of them, although I personally don't ride in the winter.
Further discussion? Councilmember Romlawi.
Well, like most often, I come to these meetings, think I'm not going to speak on something, and end up speaking on it. From what I understand is we do own equipment that does sweep and plow bike lanes. They do that in the downtown area. This came to us in 2019. So this is coming back to us after several years in the Lower Town study being completed with facts and findings coming from that. This is not a panacea of, there are many issues with this. I don't want to give people a false sense of security and safety in this area. Option B does nothing to address the motorist and pedestrian conflict points. We've done nothing to address the pedestrian motorist interaction here. And I think as much it is to have an improvement here, and one can argue that on-street parking does slow down cars, as was the case on North 7th Street near West Park, where there was talk of removing on-street parking. And we came to the conclusion that keeping the parking there on the street would help reduce traffic speeds. So this is a mixed bag, and one that doesn't address the pedestrian motorist conflict points. And, you know, if we wanted to put protected bike lanes in, I think we have the equipment that we use in the downtown, but I think it'd be a stretch, perhaps, maybe, for the organization to do that. But, you know, we're going to see some huge budget problems in several years from now. So these things are going to have some issues in the years to come when we start having financial issues big time.
Councilmember Griswold.
I'm going to be voting for this, but given that the property owners who have on-street parking right now are having something taken away from themselves, and we have an ordinance that prohibits parking in one's lawn, so in the front yard, you can only park in your driveway. I'm wondering if we can have staff work with them to make some arrangements, so.
Councilmember Griswold, I think your microphone is not on.
Okay, sorry, you're right, went off. Given that the property owners right now have the ability to park in the street, and we're taking that away from them, I will be voting on this. I would like to request that staff work with those property owners to develop a way for them to park in their front lawns if they so choose, because we have an ordinance that prohibits parking in your front lawn at this point. And I know someone who was ticketed for that recently. And so I just want to make sure that we make these property owners whole in whatever we do. And secondly, is staff available to address the question of, does on-street parking improve safety or make safety worse? Because I think we've heard both tonight, and maybe there isn't a definitive answer, but if it's a mixed bag, then I don't think we should be using safety as one of the reasons why we're removing on-street parking.
Mr. Hutchinson?
Yeah, I'm going to turn this over to our transportation manager, Raymond Hess. I think he's probably the most qualified person here to speak to that.
Mr. Hess?
Yes, good evening, council members. Raymond Hess, transportation manager. So, ultimately, when we look at improving safety along a corridor, it's about looking at those speeds, which several council members mentioned this evening. And speeds can be mitigated through several different measures. Parking is a method that can help reduce speeds, but bike lanes, especially if they include vertical elements, can also create some safety benefits as well and slow speeds as well. Part of the reason for that is in transportation, we talk about friction. This is one of the reasons why two-way streets are slower than one-way streets. One-way streets have less friction. Those cars can just kind of use it as a speedway. So when you have things on the curb side, whether it be on-street parking, bike lanes, any other sort of devices, that creates some of that friction for drivers and makes them more attentive and slow down. So I don't think it's necessarily a one-size-fits-all. It's about context in the area, what works, and then which solution provides the best outcome for all users of the corridor.
Councilmember Briggs.
Thank you. I just wanted to speak to the equipment that the city has. As far as I'm aware, we have equipment that fits in the bike lanes downtown. But for the narrower protected bike lanes that these would be, we don't have equipment that is sized for that. So that's what we're acquiring, and that's been one of the challenges in installing more protected bike lanes around the community. But I'm glad that that's on order and that we'll have that soon in our community. I think this is definitely an area that warrants having protected bike lanes, and that this is moving our community forward. We can see the overwhelming support from the adjacent neighborhood, from Ward 1 in general. I used to live in that neighborhood as well, and certainly still try to visit friends on bike through that area. It is it's a difficult corridor to navigate if you were trying to bike on Barton Drive. So this is a good improvement, and I'm glad to see us moving forward with it.
Councilmember Hayner.
Well, I stand by my remarks that the vast majority of adjacent property owners do not want this. And some might consider that it's selfish, that they just want some parking. But, just keep this in the back of our minds, please, when we move forward to not requiring any off-street parking in all residential properties moving forward. So we don't want, this is a small example of we don't want on-street parking in front of residential properties. And now later on in the meeting, we're going to address, we don't want off-street parking at residential properties. So what are the vast majority of people who own motor vehicles and perhaps in the future electric vehicles be expected to place those vehicles? And I suspect that everyone at this table and on Planning Commission and the vast majority of people in our community fit that description. I don't know anybody I know plenty of people who don't have cars, but I would say the vast majority of the community do have occasional use for a vehicle and have a vehicle. So it's just something to keep in mind. If they can't park them on the street and they can't park them off the street, then does that mean we should just do away with cars? Let's just cut to the chase and do that. Isn't that what the ultimate goal is here?
Councilmember Grand.
Thank you. I was on council when the initial attempt to put bike lanes on both sides of the stretch was tabled, and I'm really pleased to see it come back and move forward this evening. I've been taking a look at the map that's included in our packet, and it's pretty clear to me, though I understand some of it's a little fuzzy, that there will be parking for most of these homeowners either in their driveways, and if they are moving towards electric cars, they probably will need to park in their driveway or in a garage, or on some of the neighboring side streets. So I think it's important to remember that we don't own the parking that's in front of our house. It's a city asset. The streets belong to everyone. When I come up to my house and someone else is parking in front of my house, I don't think like, oh, they took my spot. I just think, oh, they're parking on the street. So it is definitely a shift that we need to make in order to think about complete streets. But mostly, it was pretty disheartening the first time we tabled this, so I'm just really happy to see it go forward.
Further discussion? Councilmember Amlawi.
Thank you. Yeah, it's good to see it come back. I think a lot of things happened in the time that it first was presented to council and now, and that is the fact that the Lower Town study has been completed and the water main work in that area has been done. We were told curb to curb things weren't going to change a whole lot, so this could be done at some other later point without any major costs associated with it. So we did our due diligence. We did the work that had to be done to begin with. The fact of owning cars, and this is just, it's getting bananas. It's like some people really think cars are going to go away if we just get rid of all the parking. I'm not drinking that Kool-Aid. Cars are shifting to electric. People are still driving. More miles driven last year than any other year. It's like, it's happening. You got 80,000 people coming into this community on a daily basis. They're not all coming in on bikes. We have to realize this. And we also have to better our community and respond to the constituents and the needs and the demands that people have for a more progressive, infrastructure in this city to facilitate safe biking and transportation. But the idea that we're going to eliminate all cars, I think, is not necessarily truthful. And it really points back to the last meeting here when I talked about the development on Detroit Street. Well, that's going to be a high-end development, so those folks there get 2 parking spaces per dwelling because they're going to have money. So I think as long as you have money you're going to find a place to park.
Councilmember? Further discussion? Councilmember Song.
I'd like to note, as a parent of a child who attended A2 STEAM, how relieved I am to see this improvement, especially in this past year when AAPS struggled to have an adequate number of bus drivers and bus routes being canceled. There were kids and families who really struggled to make sure they could get to school on time and walk to school on time, that 1.5 miles. School on time and get to work in time. So I'm hoping this is another option for families to get to and from the schools, and hopefully we can also think about their safety and their needs too. Thanks.
Further discussion? Roll call vote, please, starting with Councilmember Nelson.
Councilmember Nelson?
Yes.
Councilmember Briggs?
Yes.
Councilmember Omlawi?
Yes.
Councilmember Hayner?
No.
Councilmember Dish?
Yes.
Councilmember Griswold?
Yes.
Councilmember Song?
Yes.
Councilmember Grand?
Yes.
Councilmember Medina?
Yes.
Mayor Taylor?
Yes.
Councilmember Iyer, absent. Motion carries.
A1, we have our regular session meeting minutes of July 5, 2022. May I have a motion, please, to approve these minutes? Moved by Councilmember Omlawi, second by Councilmember Nelson. Discussion of the minutes. All in favor? Opposed? Minutes are approved. C1, an ordinance to amend section 5.16.3.g, 5.20.10, and 5.30.1 of Chapter 55, Unified Development Code of Title 5 of the Code of the City of Ann Arbor, marijuana licensees, trees in the right-of-way, landscape modifications. Moved by Councilmember Dish, seconded by Councilmember Grand. Discussion, please, of C1. Councilmember Dish.
As I communicated to all of you earlier, I would like to propose an amendment to Section G3 of the changes to the marijuana ordinance. The amendment reads, sorry?
She's reading the amendment into the record, then I'm going to ask for a second.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No,
Yes,
doing right.
I should, okay. So Section G3, subpoint E. All activities of a marijuana facility shall be conducted indoors. The amendment is as follows. Exception. Curbside pickup may be provided for any marijuana provisioning center, marijuana retailer, or marijuana microbusiness.
Is there a second? Second by Councilmember Hayner. Councilmember Dish, you still have the floor on the amendment.
Okay. Yes, okay, so I'll just speak to the amendment, which is that the city has not enforced the provision against curbside pickup since the beginning of the pandemic, which means that it's basically never been enforced because these facilities came online and basically the pandemic started. There has been no harm done by allowing for curbside pickup, and curbside pickup is a little bit of a misnomer because many of these facilities have parking lots, and so it's really drive up and have your order dropped off to you as would happen, if you were ordering food from somewhere and you pull into their parking lot. All this amendment does is remove the prohibition on curbside pickup, which has not yet been enforced, but is scheduled to be enforced in the fall, even though the pandemic is not over, and I do want to emphasize that. So this does not grant any parking spaces or anything like that. All it does is remove the prohibition against curbside pickup.
Is this friendly to the body? On a procedural question, I'm going to jump to Q. Yes?
Well, I guess I was just wondering, my understanding is that amendments to the UDC like this go through an ordinance revision committee. Ordinance revision committee through the planning commission, am I right? There's a subcommittee that discusses things like this. So I guess my question is, should this not go back to that committee? Because I know that I guess I would just like more thoughtful discussion about why in the first place, when this ordinance was passed, we intentionally restricted all the activities to indoors. I'm just saying, like, is there a process for more meaningful discussion about the significance of this? Because could we could we make the decision not to enforce it for a longer period of time until it can be discussed and added to, have the ordinance actually amended? I mean, there's a plan to, I guess my question is, all right, so there's a plan to start enforcing it in September. Who made that decision that the enforcement was going to start in September?
Can I address that question, Mayor and Council?
Yes, yes, please, Mr. Leonard.
Sure. Good evening, Mayor and Council. I'm Brett Leonard. I'm the planning manager. Thank you for the question, Councilmember Nelson. There were a wide variety of activities that businesses were doing to adapt during COVID. We saw a lot of curbside service. We saw temporary signage at times. And to be blunt, from a zoning perspective, we were not out actively enforcing those provisions because at the time it seemed prudent to help businesses find ways to adapt. As time has passed, I think it is more relevant and important for us to start following the ordinances that are on the books. I think at the time that unlike other businesses, marijuana facilities have a specific requirement that all activities be conducted indoors. I would say that would manifested because of some concerns that this was a relatively new business typology in the city, not only specific to retail provisioning centers and micro businesses, but all of the marijuana facility types. There was a lot of, I would say, provisions made to try and limit any adverse impacts to the addition of these businesses to our community. I don't think that those have been realized. So my intention was because marijuana facilities required annual licensing, they are reviewed by all departments. My intention was to start communicating to these centers that at some determined time we would start measuring that to make sure that they were compliant with that provision. Subsequent to these other changes being considered by the ORC and Planning Commission, it seems like a relatively minor change to the ordinance, and the City Council does have the authority to make modifications at this table if they deem.
Councilmember Nelson, Councilmember Hayner.
Well, thanks. I second that amendment because I agree with the notion behind it that what we have happening here is a new business who has realized that the way of doing business that we outlined, for kind of prescribed for them, it wasn't working out for them, and that a way that a temporary method that they use is curbside services has provided much better service for their customers, and so on and so on. And so I think this is perfectly fine. I know we've been contacted by some people who had concerns about this expiring, or this kind of grace expiring, and so I'm going to support this amendment. And I'm going to take a half a second to repeat my remarks that I made at Hash Bash earlier in this year, that I would like the marijuana retailers in our community to see if they can do a better job to eliminate waste. I got so many pictures of full garbage cans outside of marijuana dispensaries with these bags that they make them come out with their purchase in and so on, and all these non-recyclable items and items that are branded items and so on. And let's find a better way to, as this business continues to grow, to only take the best practices forward with us if we could. I'm sorry that's a little aside, but thanks for this amendment.
Councilmember Ramlawi.
Thank you, and thanks for bringing this forward as we're hopefully coming out of this pandemic. I guess, earlier concerns about activities to be conducted indoors, for me at the time, revolved around security and making sure that we didn't have any problems related to, product finding itself in the wrong hands, or anything like that. I just don't know if somebody's here, if there's any feedback on or ideas on a couple issues. That is, are there any concerns by the Ann Arbor Police Department? And secondly, whether we're going to be checking IDs and making sure that, this might come in some other form and not in this ordinance change, but in some other change that might be tied to this of whether we're going to be checking IDs and requiring IDs to be checked to make sure that, the proof and the process that it is conducted indoors is still conducted outdoors as well. I guess it's his first reading, so there's plenty of time to get those answers.
I got Councilmember Briggs on the amendment.
Thanks. I would be curious between first and second as well to get that feedback if there has been any issues. I guess I have a question about implementation of this. The example that you gave, I have part of a question for the sponsor, potentially, if you can respond, and then also a question for staff. So the example you gave is a facility that has a parking lot, and many do, but many in the downtown area do not. And certainly during COVID, there have been a number of bagged meters, but I don't anticipate that will continue long-term. And so curbside pickup, when there is not a dedicated parking spot in a downtown location, we're already having a lot of downtown traffic management issues. And so I think this is this intended to apply only to places that have parking lots, or is it intended, okay, so broadly. So I guess, a question to Mr. Leonard, if he would like to respond to this. Do you have any comments regarding kind of those facilities that might be located in the downtown area?
This change would enable the possibility for them to provide curbside service as any facility would. This is not a declaration or permission as to how our right-of-way might be regulated. The UDC is not the document to do that, but I think it would probably naturally lead to a question about the city's role, and I think we would consider that similarly to any other use of the right-of-way in relative to downtown businesses. So this change is not going to be definitive that says you can use, that we're going to dedicate a downtown parking space to it, but it does open the possibility for that dialogue to occur. And unfortunately, I don't know all of the specifics about how the public right-of-way and parking spaces can be used for commerce, but I don't anticipate that this would be any different. As it relates to the question of IDs, this industry is very regulated, so I don't anticipate any changes to the verification process. This is regulated similar to alcohol, except it goes further in that all inventory is tracked on a statewide basis from seed to sale. So I think that while we don't have any local ordinance that would dictate ID verification, it is still, regardless of the delivery of the product, highly regulated at the state level.
Councilmember Griswold on the amendment.
On the amendment, is an automobile required to have curbside pickup, or could someone walk up or ride their bike up to get curbside? And
Yeah, I think the intention would be that it could be any alternative delivery at the curb, so it wouldn't necessarily require a vehicle.
Okay, because I was questioned about that again today. We talked about possibly having a resolution or ordinance that would allow cyclists and pedestrians to go to drive-up windows, and that sort of worked itself out during the pandemic. I'm going to vote for this, but I'm a little concerned that curbside is just a progressive way of saying drive-through. And I know that's not exactly true, but these parking lots, where there are parking lots, were really not designed for this. It's not like an A&W parking lot where you drive in and get your root beer. And I'm very concerned about the corner of Yost and Washtenaw, where there is an unmarked crosswalk. You have disabled persons with disabilities crossing Washtenaw there at an unmarked crosswalk. At the same time, you have cars lined up trying to get into the dispensary there and out of the dispensary there. And because it used to be, I believe, a gas station, the entrance and exits are within 50 feet approximately of the intersection. So it's very, very congested, and could we take a look at that area and possibly, if we're going to allow curbside, look at how curbside is going to work in the existing parking lots? And that's probably not in the UDC, but then where is it so that we don't have a death?
Sorry, it took me a second to fix my computer. So this UDC would not change any infrastructure changes to our network. That would be a similar change that we would want to look at and prioritize in the context of any other changes we want to make. I do want to point out that as part of the consideration of these facilities, they require special exception use. And in cases such as that one, we, despite imperfections now, we're actually able to improve the circulation in the majority of these facilities by closing curb cuts in many situations and ensuring alternative parking for bicycles and the like. Mm-hmm. So I don't think this would open up the opportunity for the existing site to be utilized as it was previously approved and reviewed by the city. It would enable that delivery to happen in whatever the context of that site is, that one as well with its existing parking lot, whereas now it would be forcing anybody to leave their vehicle or bicycle and physically enter the structure. So in short, it's not going to mandate physical changes to these sites, but it will allow the use of those sites in a different way.
Oh, okay, thank you. So can you give me a recommendation, given that I am concerned about a site and I believe that this curbside is going to exacerbate the problems? What do I do as a council member to try to address this?
I will take your message. I will talk with the transportation team about that intersection. I think the first step is you were mentioning a crosswalk to see what level of infrastructure there exists. And then I can also provide the approved plan for that site if that is of interest for you to review. I think ultimately the question is opening. This is a text amendment. It's not a site plan approval. So if you are uncomfortable with that change to this site and other sites, then that would probably be a reason that you wouldn't be supportive of this option and mandating that all the traffic still has to enter.
So, okay, thank you. And I just want to mention that we're dealing with a MDOT roadway with
Councilor.
Washtenaw, which adds to the complexity. Thank you.
Let me suggest that if there are other questions, perhaps we have a vote on this amendment, and then council members can run those questions to staff directly in the intervening weeks. All in favor of the amendment, please say aye. Opposed? The amendment passes. Further discussion of the main motion. Councilor British.
Okay, so the main motion is a group of amendments that affects marijuana licenses, that excludes curb cut widths from the frontage calculations for required street trees in order to promote the health of the trees, that requires a street tree planting fee in place of the street tree escrow, which is cumbersome and redundant. And there's a little bit more about street trees as well. So this is a very rich and comprehensive set of amendments. I wanted to say just a couple more things about the marijuana changes, because I regard those as the biggest and possibly most that we might want to talk about. So these changes would allow marijuana businesses on lots zoned limited industrial, limited light industrial, and heavy industrial to hold up to 5 licenses per lot, and would allow up to 2 licenses per lot for facilities on lots zoned research or office research light industrial. So what does that really mean? It means that if you are in these zones that are not residential zones, you can have more than one of the same kind of license. If, for example, a grower wanted to increase the number of plants they're allowed to grow, they could get 2 growing licenses. You could also have licenses of more than one kind. So if you are a licensed dispensary and you want to add a consumption lounge, and there is a consumption license available, you could put that under the same roof. Now, what will not change with these amendments is that marijuana businesses located in zones other than industrial or office research are restricted to one license. Second of all, we are not adding opportunities for additional provisioning center, retail centers, or consumption licenses. Provisioning center/retail remain capped at 28, as do consumption licenses. And finally, the same restrictions on location apply to provisioning center retailers and micro businesses. So they can be no closer than 600 feet to one another, and they are prohibited to be closer than 1,000 feet to a K-12 school. But why make this change? We're bringing the city's marijuana ordinance into alignment with Michigan state law, which allows this kind of stacking of license, which is to say holding multiple licenses under one roof. On one lot, I should put it, is more specific, more precise. So this ordinance besides aligning ourselves with state law, this ordinance may also help local entrepreneurs and BIPOC entrepreneurs get into this lucrative field, because it could enable a group of license holders to band together on one lot and share the startup costs.
Councilmember?
Done.
Further discussion on the main motion? Councilmember Briggs.
I have a question for Mr. Leonard. So I watched the Planning Commission meeting on this and mostly made sense. The one question I had is, so there's 28 consumption licenses right now. If I heard correctly, 28 provisioning center licenses and 1 consumption center license. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And if there is an interest in a facility getting a consumption license, stacking their licenses, having additional activities at a provisioning center, they would need to come back in front of the Planning Commission and apply for special exception use. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, just wanted to make sure that was correct. So this is the piece that I think is these amendments make a lot of sense to me. I think there's a fair amount of efficiency, especially when we're talking about the industrial districts. But having sat on Planning Commission during a lot of the earlier discussions around granting these licenses, certainly some locations were more controversial than others in terms of granting a provisioning center. Initially, we granted these as a medical marijuana. Then this has shifted. It's now recreational, and now I just think it's important for us to be clear to the public as we're moving forward with this, that this provides an opportunity to stack a license, to have a provisioning center and a consumption license at the same location. I'm comfortable with moving this forward, but I think it is a change for our community, and I think it's the biggest change in this ordinance, and just something that we probably should get feedback on between now and the public hearing.
Councilmember Rumlowy.
Thank you. I have a question on the impact on the budget and the revenues that come to the city from these licenses. If one is to stack licenses, will they be ultimately paying less, or are they going to still pay the incremental costs that are currently being charged?
We'll likely pay more because more licenses would be granted at the same sites.
So in any event, that there wouldn't be a decrease in, okay, all right. And I look forward to hearing, the public's response to this. Again, this is first reading. There'll be opportunities for us to hear more and learn more before this comes back for a second time. Thank you.
Further discussion? All in favor? Opposed? As amended, it is approved. C2, ordinance to amend sections 5.16.1.a, 5.16.2.a, 5.16.2.b, 5.16.3.j, 5.16.3.p, 5.16.3.j, 5.16.4.b, 5.16.6.c, 5.16.6.g, and to repeal and replace Section 5.19 of Chapter 55, Unified Development Code of Title 5 of the Code of the City of Ann Arbor, moved by Councilmember Dish, seconded by Councilmember Song. Discussion, please, of C2. Councilmember Dish.
So again, I want to be brief. It's a complicated set of changes, and I'll be brief and hope to stimulate your questions. So these amendments do not eliminate parking. They do not eliminate cars. They eliminate mandatory parking minimums across the city. And they also place a maximum parking, so a cap on the number of parking that TC1 developments can offer. I want to say a few words about eliminating minimums, because this is not an attempt to get rid of cars. This is an attempt to get rid of wasted space, particularly wasted space that is made of asphalt, and wasted space that costs a lot of money to produce. All of those things are bad for our sustainability goals and our affordability goals. So parking is expensive, and it adds to the cost of housing units. It's really important that we not require more parking than needed. We currently do that. Developers are renting spaces in nearby parking decks, and those spaces go unused. They are passing the cost of that onto their renters. The last thing we want for affordability and sustainability goals is to have underutilized car storage. These changes are also important support for 20-minute neighborhoods. We'd like to see more retail infill, like Argus Farm Market in residential neighborhoods. We'd like to put more services within walking distance of residents. As Adam Goodman mentioned, our current parking minimums can be a barrier to realizing the neighborhood coffee shop or bar. And who could possibly be against a neighborhood coffee shop or bar? The TC1 is the one place where we are adding a new parking maximum, and that will be 3 parking spaces per 1,000 square feet. You can find that in section 5.19.3 of the parking several page long ordinance. The city currently has maximums in office for some services, for retail and marijuana businesses. What the decision was in TC1 was this is a mixed-use district, and rather than have separate maximums for each of the uses that could be in there, we decided to set the number at 3. That is a little higher than we typically see being necessary for residential use. It is lower than mostly we typically allow for office. We're probably going to iterate on this one.
Further discussion? Councilor Hayner.
Oh, thanks. We're going to pass this on to the second reading. There's a couple things in here that are sort of not really accurate. So I'm just going to make some remarks here. First of all, I'm not thrilled that we're making all these text-based changes to our UDC on the supposed brink of redoing the comprehensive land use plan. That's the time when we were supposed to talk about these sweeping changes that affect 20, 30,000 parcels around the city. But there's some things in here that just don't make any sense, or they don't really kind of agree with each other. So we even quote in one of the lead-ins to this that this should be done through the plan review process. Well, this isn't. The notion that parking automatically means an impervious surface is belied by the Y lot. All of the parking, we could require all the parking in TC1, whether it be big or small, to be a permeable surface and act as a giant storm collector. So to say automatically that parking means impervious surface is just false. And one of the things that this is going to do is punt this decision, even with the maximums, over to developers. And I'm not sure that's necessarily where we want to be. I have another consideration and concern that we haven't really done anything to address the ADA needs in our community. And so to avoid being ableist, as many of our policies are around transportation, I would like to look at where we have in here that if somebody wants to have a parking spot and they need a parking spot because they have ADA compliance or a handicap sticker or whatever, that they have to go to a ZBA variance to be granted. So they have to do a $1,000 ZBA application and beg the Zoning Board of Appeals to grant that. I'm not sure that's the right approach to creating inclusivity with our parking needs. So, I mean, we'll move this to the next reading, but I wanted to express a few of those concerns that have come up this week. Thank you.
Further discussion? Councilmember Briggs.
I think it is important to further discuss the implications of doing this outside of the comprehensive plan update, land use plan update. The staff report or memo clearly identifies that this was included as a recommendation both as part of our comprehensive transportation plan, which we adopted last year, and as part of our carbon neutrality plan, which was adopted in 2020. Both of those plans had widespread community engagement. The transportation plan, in addition to a number of public events, had a response rate of 1,756 online survey responses. The consultant that was engaged in that was noted how high our public engagement was in the city of Ann Arbor. Furthermore, our climate action plan, as we know, Dr. Stoltz is quite the overachiever. That plan had an incredible amount of public participation. There were 68 public events for that plan development. We will not see that for our land use plan update. As much as we would like to, that's an exceptional amount of public events associated with a plan. Point is that we have had a lot of engagement around this, and the transportation plan calls for eliminating all parking minimums, as does the climate action plan, and those were plans that we unanimously adopted as council. And so at some point, each one of us, at least for the transportation plan, approved that idea.
Councilmember Rumlowy.
Thank you. There's been a lot of talk, I guess, tonight on cars and the future of parking and who bears the cost and who continues to have privilege with them later, which I think ultimately is going to be the case. By the time this comes back for second reading, we'll know more about the AAATA ballot initiative and whether that passes or not. We talk about transit-oriented development, but quite frankly, we don't have a high-functioning mass transit system. So, until we have one, I just find it hard to believe that these goals are going to be met or delivered on. So we'll see what happens in 2 weeks. I believe people will continue to drive, like I said before earlier tonight. I think people who are going to be affected most will be the working class and the lower class and the folks that can't afford bigger lots and, places to park their car, I guess. But, you have people who come in to visit. It's hard. I live on 7th Street. I know the difficulty of having guests over. It's very difficult. It makes you really think long and hard about where you want to live sometimes. It'd be nice to be able to have people who aren't going to bike over come visit you. So there'll be a lot of conversations between now and then and a vote taken to see really if we're going to have legs under this to move forward.
Councilmember Grand.
Thank you. I'm incredibly excited to see this move forward. I think this is a long time coming. I'm also really pleased. I think a number of years ago, it struck me today that we probably couldn't have had this conversation right before an election because parking was such a fraught conversation. And I think it's reflective of conversations that are happening in our community and nationally about the importance of addressing climate change and affordability. Even if you just do a quick search, you can see this is not radical policy. We're really behind in not implementing this. So it definitely, from my perspective, doesn't make sense to put it off any longer. I wish we'd done it a long time ago. But you can easily do quick searches and find, scores of cities around the country that have already eliminated parking minimums. It's a small step that we can take. I think it really will enable just a lot more flexibility in terms of the types of developments that we'll see and the types of businesses that we'll see. Even actually the American Parking Association actually advocates to eliminate parking minimums because they want to see their spaces effectively utilized. So if the folks who are all for parking want us to get rid of parking minimums, I think it's the least we can do. Thanks.
Further discussion? Councilmember Griswold.
From my perspective, I would rather have parking driven by the market and just totally unzone parking and not talk about it, because we're spending a lot of time talking about parking. And we know that developers are not going to be able to get loans unless they have a certain amount of parking, and we definitely don't want to require parking in the neighborhood. So I'm just curious why parking has got the focus that it has. I really don't think it's all that important, and we definitely need to be addressing our sustainability initiatives. But I will be voting for this, and the public can decide.
Further discussion? Roll call vote, please. I'm sorry, Councilmember Song.
I think it's probably worth clarifying that we're not taking away parking. This is part of future planning so that when we consider the development that's coming to our city, that we need in our city, that this provides developers an option to not be able to bring these projects forth without having to invest in unnecessary, unused parking. I think it's very simple. No one's taking away anyone's parking. As a mom who drives a giant minivan and carpools, I'm okay with this. So I don't think this idea, the fear mongering around parking being taken away is not helpful to this discussion. So I look forward to the second reading.
Further discussion? Councilmember Griswold.
In case I misspoke, I was referring to parking requirements. I didn't hear any fear-mongering. I just think that we've elevated parking to a higher level than it deserves. Thank you.
Further discussion? All in favor? Opposed? It's approved. DC1, resolution directing city administrator to expand compliance evaluations and to continue annual reports regarding contractor compliance with prevailing wage requirements. Moved by Councilmember Redina, seconded by Councilmember Dish. Discussion, please, of DC1. Councilmember Redina.
Thank you, Mayor Taylor. This was sponsored by Councilmember Iyer, who can't be here tonight. I will ask to be added as a co-sponsor, but she did provide me with a statement to introduce it, so I wanted to read that on her behalf. CM Iyer writes, thanks to Mr. Mahoney and staff for helping to put this resolution together. What we are doing here is following best practices for prevailing wage compliance as defined by federal and state agencies across the country, such as HUD. Prevailing wage mandates that skilled workers are paid fair wages for their job classification on city-funded construction projects so that taxpayers get the highest quality work at the best value. These practices call for municipalities to periodically conduct confidential on-site interviews with a sampling of contractor and subcontractor employees to determine whether skilled workers are being paid in accordance with prevailing wage requirements. This is done to ensure contractors are not substituting less skilled workers than what the contract mandates, leading to inferior quality work. It's recommended that these interviews are conducted a minimum of once within 2 weeks of initial payroll and once within 2 weeks of final payroll. Random spot checks on certified payroll are also strongly recommended in the guidance of these agencies. Absence of issues in the past 5 years is not a reason to stop compliance activities. In fact, the reason we haven't found problems is precisely because we have been checking. If we were to announce to contractors that we were no longer performing such checks, it would be an invitation to flout our prevailing wage ordinance. As long as we care about contractors following our prevailing wage ordinance, we should be employing best practices to ensure compliance. Further, this has never been more important for our city than it is now, as we embark on a multitude of taxpayer-funded solar projects. Continued reporting to council is also a crucial part of our oversight, which does not end with the approval of contracts. I encourage my colleagues to support this cost-neutral, good government measure to ensure Ann Arbor residents get the high-quality construction they expect and deserve. Thank you.
Further discussion, Councilmember Rumlowy.
Well, later I'll be asking something about this, but first I got a few questions. I know the city administrator reported to us, I believe at least, earlier this year that this practice was going to be ended because it found no violations, and it was costing tens of thousands of dollars a year to perform. I just heard a statement that was read out loud by my council member, colleague that this was going to be a net neutral cost, which got me spurred to ask that question, because from my recollection, there was a cost associated with this. Further, I believe, this body sometimes contradicts itself, most often. And the fact of micromanaging, we're supposed to set policy and leave staff to do the work that they're entrusted to do and often praised for. And I'm finding it mixed signal here of going in and doing spot checks, on-site visits to micromanage a policy that we have. So a couple questions before I put forward something else is that what is the cost of doing this a year? And do we do this anywhere else where we have unannounced visits, sort of like what the health department does for me at work, or they show up randomly to inspect? Are we doing this anywhere else in the organization, and what the cost of this is on an annual basis?
Mr. Hutchinson.
I can address that question. This is Nick Hutchinson, city engineer. According to the report that we provided for Prevailing on Prevailing Wage last year, the cost of doing this reporting and record keeping was approximately $18,600 of staff time to do that. And the second part of the question, do we do this in other parts of the organization? I can compare with other construction projects on our local agency projects where we're using federal funding. We're required to do it by the state, so it's not something that contractors are unfamiliar with. And we do have to do it on those projects, and we always have in the past as well.
Councilmember?
When you said state projects...
That's 3 minutes, Councilmember.
I guess I'll have to speak again. Stay tuned.
Councilmember Hayner.
Thanks. I'd just like to say two things about this. Question: what is staff's assessment of the need for these on-site spot checks? Response: the need for conducting wage rate interviews is probably redundant with the checking of certified payroll based on lack of compliance issues identified in the recent 5 years worth of spot checks. Well, that says it all. We're not having a problem with this. So I'm not sure where this is coming from, especially considering that wage is the price that you pay for something is no guarantee of the quality of the work that one receives, especially in Ann Arbor. I think we all know Ann Arbor has its own inflation when it comes to bidding on things, and I see that all the time in my own business. So I'm glad that we have prevailing wage ordinance, and I'm glad that it appears that the vast majority of the contractors we use, almost to the last one, comply with that. I don't believe it is necessary to do a continuous and ongoing checking of this. I would be satisfied with the payroll assessment and the promise that there will be checks in the field for this moving forward. And hope that our administrator would, and the folks who are out there in the field especially, who have the experience, can take a look at a crew that shows up and say, maybe these aren't people that are making a prevailing wage, right? And so I think that that would be enough. I don't know that this is a necessary addition to the tasks for our administrator.
Further discussion? Councilor Briggs.
Mr. Hutchinson, I appreciate you drawing our attention back to that report. I am a little confused because in the agenda response questions that Councilmember Nelson asked about, the cost in staff time to conduct these on-site spot checks, the response was that the cost was negligible, that the spot checks are already being conducted by city staff and they're already on site inspecting the construction project, and therefore the cost is negligible. And so we received a couple of different responses from staff about, maybe $18,000 feels negligible in the grand scheme of things. Maybe that but I'm curious a little bit more to focus in on that issue, because when I saw that this was a negligible cost, and this provides us greater assurance that our policies are being verified, that doesn't seem problematic for me. But so if I could have a response to that, that would be helpful.
Yeah, allow me to clarify. I apologize for the confusion. The figure of 18,600 that I quoted was the total staff cost of doing all of the wage rate compliance, data keeping, record keeping that we do. The on-site interview portion of that is a negligible cost because it's conducted by our inspectors in the field that are already there anyway. So it's really not the on-site interview portion of that is really a negligible cost. Does that clarify?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Okay.
Councilmember Umlai.
Yeah, I just don't think I'll have enough time to ask any questions because that time counts against your council member comments, unfortunately, with new set of rules. Welcome to transparency. I just would like to see the sponsor of this resolution be present when they bring it forward. I have a motion to postpone this to the next meeting when the sponsor can be here as well to vote on this. I mean, I just think it's only proper for the sponsor to be here.
Is there a second to the motion postponed? Councilmember Griswold, discussion of the postponement. Councilmember Ramlawi.
Again, just setting the date for the first meeting in August.
For my part, I'm going to decline the offer to postpone. Councilmember Iyer had the opportunity to push this back to another meeting. She declined. I'm happy to vote on it now. Further discussion of the postponement? Councilor Grand.
Thank you. I'd also just like to point out that there were a lot of questions asked about this in our packet, including some that were asked at the council table and answered again this evening. So I feel like, and I thank my colleagues for asking those questions. I think they were fairly comprehensive and gave me a good idea about, just the pros and cons of this resolution.
Further discussion? Roll call vote on the postponement, starting with Councilmember Nelson.
Councilmember Nelson?
Yes.
Councilmember Briggs?
No.
Councilmember Ramlawi?
Yes.
Councilmember Hayner?
Sure, yes.
Councilmember Dish?
No.
Councilmember Griswold?
Yes.
Councilmember Song?
No.
Councilmember Graham?
No.
Councilmember Medina?
No.
Mayor Taylor?
No.
Councilmember Iyer, absent. Motion fails.
Councilmember Malawi, you still have the floor on the main motion.
Well, with the sponsor not here, I just don't feel that that's the proper courtesy. I know if this was my resolution, I'd ask for it to be postponed. I wouldn't bring it at a meeting I wasn't present at. I will not be supporting this. I don't think we're getting full consideration or collegial reciprocity with how this is being put forward. I think it's redundant. I think it's micromanaging, and I won't be supporting it.
Councilmember Griswold.
I'd like to ask the city administrator to weigh in on this. Does he support this? Does he believe it's micromanaging or that it's needed? And I guess I'd like to have an aging report on A2 Fix-It tickets, but I don't think it would be appropriate to bring it forward as a resolution.
I don't really have a position on the item. It's a policy call. As was indicated earlier, I had made a move to end the practice earlier because of the issues that we did not see, but we respect the policymakers' right to set the direction. So I don't have a position for or against. We'll implement what we're directed to implement.
Councilmember Song.
I think we're all pretty reachable over email and phone. I was able to speak to Councilmember Iyer earlier today and ask her questions directly about this amendment, and I was really pleased to see that Travis was ready to speak to it as well tonight. So along with the packet and knowing that we're each accessible to each other, should we choose to be, I'm ready to vote.
Councilmember Nelson.
I think there was a little confusion there. We're not actually voting on the postponement at this point. We're on the main motion. I'm persuaded by staff's assessment that this is unnecessary. I don't think I'm going to be able to support this because it just strikes me as unnecessary.
Councilmember Hayner.
Well, I think the reason my colleagues might have suggested postponement is because there might be questions that we would ask of the sponsor, like, which, I would prefer to do my business in public, right? Yeah, we can all email and contact people and so on, but even our charter says we're supposed to deliberate here at the table. I would ask, what is the impetus for this? Is there some kind of problem looming that we're not aware of? Are we finding, against what has been reported, that there are people who aren't following our prevailing wage? I don't understand the origins of this resolution outside of the fact that we were going to stop doing it because it wasn't necessary. And so that's barring the ability to ask these questions in public of the sponsor. I'm going to vote no on this because it was a program that was being dropped because it wasn't necessary anymore. That's good enough for me.
Councilmember Regina Briggs-Grand.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm happy to provide answers to both of those questions directly from the sponsor because they were part of the initial statement. Absence of issues in the past 5 years is not a reason to stop compliance activities. In fact, the reason that we have found problems is because we have been checking. If we were to announce that to contractors that we were no longer performing such checks, it would be an invitation to flout our prevailing wage ordinance. She also stated that the best practices, that these were following the best practices as defined by federal and state agencies across the country, such as HUD. I think that answers the question as to the impetus behind this. I know that to be true because I talked to her about it when this first came up, and we were working on this. I would go on to say that I guess I'm a little surprised by the reaction to this. While it is certainly true that staff announced that they were ending this because we had not seen any issues. As a policy-making body that has set a policy, we should be interested in the data proving that our policy is being enforced and that contractors are following the rules. I agree with Councilmember Iyer that announcing that to contractors that we're no longer going to check that they're following the policy is an invitation to no longer follow the policy. I am always interested in having more information for us to make informed decisions, and I think having this information does exactly that. So I look forward to supporting this and encourage my colleagues to do so as well.
Councilmember Briggs.
I no longer need to comment.
Councilmember Grand.
Thank you. I'll just add that as someone who was around when we passed this ordinance at the table initially, it came from, I think, and maybe here's where some of the, I completely understand where staff is coming from, but it came in response to mistrust in the community that we were actually following prevailing wage. So doing the occasional spot check, I think, is just best practice. As we heard from staff, it's not going to, have any sort of additional, significant cost. But it really is just speaking, I think, to community members who care about, are we paying our contractors fairly? So it's not, it didn't come out of a vacuum. The policy came from feedback that we heard from the community. That's why it's there in the first place. So I think this is a perfectly reasonable step to take. If it were costing, hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe we'd be having a different conversation. But I think given the negligible cost, it's just perfectly reasonable.
Councilmember Nelson.
I'm wondering if staff could explain the process of checking certified payroll, because that was part of the explanation for why these spot checks were perhaps not necessary, because compliance could be identified in certified payroll, checking that. What does that look like?
Checking certified payroll is basically an administrative process. Contractor submits their payroll records every two weeks, I think. We check them based on the required Davis-Bacon wage rates that they're required to pay, and it's usually done by a staff member in the office. The other end of that is doing the interviews on site, and that's just another way of double checking that talking to the individual employee to verify that they're actually getting paid that rate.
So talking to the employees about verifying that is in fact the rate that they're getting, that is happening already. That's not the on-site spot check, or is that the on-site?
That is the on-site spot check. We've been doing that for the past 5 years or so.
Okay, so they are certifying that their payroll is accurate, and the on-site spot check is literally asking the person, is this legitimately what you are receiving?
That is correct, yes.
Okay, thanks.
Further discussion, Councilmember Dish.
I'm sorry, I have another clarification question. Is there a difference between scheduled wage interviews and random spot checks? So we're doing ones at the beginning, in the first 2 weeks of the process, and in the last 2 weeks of a construction process. Those are scheduled, right? And then random spot checks are ones where you don't announce that you're coming beforehand, where you might imagine that you might find different things than you find in a scheduled check, or perhaps not.
I don't know that there's a difference here. We calling it random or calling it scheduled, I don't know that we necessarily make that distinction. We do it when it makes sense to do it, usually early in the project. We also do it with the subcontractors as well, which are oftentimes not on the project for very long. So we pretty much have to do it when they're there, like a paving contractor coming in, for example. So I don't know that there's a real distinction there between scheduled and unscheduled. Regardless of whether it's scheduled or unscheduled, it's the same activity. It's talking to the individual employee and seeing what it is that, asking them the questions about how much it is that they make.
Further discussion? Roll call vote, please, starting with Councilmember Nelson.
Councilmember Nelson?
No.
Councilmember Briggs?
Yes.
Councilmember Malawi?
No.
Councilmember Hayner?
No.
Councilmember Dish?
Yes.
Councilmember Griswold?
Yes.
Councilmember Song?
Yes.
Councilmember Grand?
Yes.
Councilmember Medina,
Yes.
Mayor Taylor,
Yes.
Councilmember Iyer, absent. Motion carries.
DC2, resolution to organize a joint meeting of interested individuals from the Environmental Commission, Transportation Commission, Energy Commission, A20 ambassadors, and other community stakeholders to identify opportunities for greater coordination around transportation, pedestrian safety, and sustainability initiatives related to sidewalk expansion and maintenance. Moved by Councilmember Griswold, seconded by Councilmember Dish. Discussion, please, at DC2. Councilmember Griswold.
First, I'd like to offer an amendment that we include the Commission on Disability Issues to the list of commissions.
Is there a second? Second by Councilmember Dish. Is that friendly? Friendly. Councilmember Griswold.
Secondly, I submitted a resolution to staff that was much broader than this, and it was about optimizing our decision-making. And Dr. Missy Stoltz rewrote this, and I'd like to thank her for doing that because I see this as something that's much more attainable in the first step in a process. And so I would ask her to explain her goals with this resolution.
Mayor, I'm not sure if Dr. Stoltz is on the call.
Mr. Mayor, Dr. Stoltz was under the weather this morning. She didn't attend. Staff, I don't believe she's able to be with us this evening. On her behalf, I can say, since we did talk about it, what we saw as the overall intent was to ensure there was proper coordination across various relevant commissions in addressing certain issues or policy issues. And so Dr. Stoltz put forward this language to just sort of call out that we would in fact initiate a meeting of all the relevant parties, I guess as amended with the Commission on Disabilities, to ensure that the proper coordination is taking place.
Councilmember Griswold, you still have the floor.
Okay, thank you. And I guess I see or have seen where there's been friction between community members, and we heard tonight that friction is good if you want to slow down vehicular traffic, but friction is not good if you want to slow down progress in terms of meeting your transportation and sustainability goals. A couple examples, the Traver sidewalk, the Sunset sidewalk, they became very political, and whenever we're talking about the safety of our pedestrians and especially our children, we want to take the politics out of that as much as possible. So that was part of the reason for this. Also, I have submitted an amendment to Jackie, if she could share that, Jackie Vaudrey. And it is asking that this group look at the Geddes Avenue and Hickory Lane sidewalks as an example of where we want to evaluate that request based on all of our initiatives, and also to do environmental assessment of that project. And so if we could put a stay on that sidewalk project until we have evaluated it, until this group has evaluated it, so that it's consistent with all of our initiatives. And at the same time, we may want to modify, revise, bring back to council some of our initiatives in an effort to optimize our decision-making and ensure that they are consistent. I'd also like to point out that...
Sorry, is there a second to this resolution? Second by Councilmember Ramlani. Councilmember Griswold?
That the Geddes Avenue plan that has been going on for many years was adopted after we adopted complete streets. And there was a conscious decision to put the sidewalk on the north side of the street, and due to the slope of the road on the south side, there is not a sidewalk. And so we need to look at this request for a sidewalk within the context of the whole neighborhood and the flow of pedestrian traffic.
Further discussion of the amendment? Councilmember Briggs.
Well, I am willing to support the original amendment with the original resolution with a small amendment. I would not be supportive of this amendment, which entirely changes the nature of the resolution to, which was fairly narrowly focused before, but focuses it very narrowly on a specific project, which I don't think it's appropriate for us to invite 4 different commissions to weigh in on one specific project. We have a staff that's available to do this. And there may be work that needs to be happen on Getty's, but this is not the appropriate mechanism for elevating that concern.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I'll get you on the end. We've got a point of order question.
Yeah, I think I need to recuse myself from this. Part of it, I recused myself from the vote on this issue as a member of Racket Club. So with council's acquiescence, I'm going to step away from the conversation about the amendment and come back.
We need to vote.
Is it a vote?
This is recollecting the charter enables council members to request council's acquiescence for standing down with respect to a vote where a council member has a particular and an immediate financial interest as a Racket Club member, where the group is being assessed an amount with respect to this project. Prior advice has been that Racket Club members don't vote on Hickory Lane sidewalk project votes. Discussion? Councilmember Amlai.
Thank you. I appreciate the consideration of recusal on this discussion. I'm finding it that I need to ask our city attorney whether it's necessary. I don't know the details of the relationship between the council member and the Racket Club, but I don't feel that the property of the Racket Club is in question here. This is a right-of-way. This is public safety. This is, and I just think I would like the council member to be part of this vote. I don't believe that there's a need for recusal in this instance. This is not about the Racket Club.
We got, I guess I'll say as a matter of fact, I believe the Hickory Lane sidewalk project, unless I'm mistaken, does
If I
indeed.
can just ask the city attorney.
Well, as a matter of fact, it does relate to
necessary.
the Racket Club, and the advice in the past has been that because costs of the Racket Club are distributed among members, that has been the advice previous. Ms. Carr?
Mayor Taylor, quite honestly, I don't understand the pecuniary relationship here. So I would need to, but if there's been past advice by the prior city attorney, I would stand by his advice. If you want me to opine, I need to understand the pecuniary relationship here.
If I can speak, I mean, we're all required to take votes, and I just don't think this is one a recusal is necessary.
Further discussion of the request to recuse.
There is a financial conflict, and that's why I will be supporting
Further
the
discussion of the request.
recusal.
Thank you. Further discussion of the request to recuse. Roll call vote on the request to recuse, starting with Councilmember Nelson.
Councilmember Nelson?
Yes.
Councilmember Briggs?
Yes?
Councilmember Amlawi?
No.
Councilmember Hayner?
No.
Councilmember Dish?
Yes.
Councilmember Griswold?
Yes.
Councilmember Song?
Yes.
Councilmember Grant? Councilmember Dina?
Yes.
Mayor Taylor?
Yes.
Councilmember Iyer, absent. Motion carries.
With respect to the amendment, I've got Councilmember Briggs on the amendment. You've spoken on the amendment, pardon me. I think you were done, Councilmember Briggs, is that correct? Councilmember Amlawi on the amendment.
We have an instance here that I do agree with my counterpart in the Fifth Ward, where I feel I'm not in support of this amendment. This amendment is way too specific. If we're going to be talking about a collaboration between many different boards of our organization, we should probably be looking at a much larger sampling of projects and situations for them to take a look at. I think this does not give us enough variables and understanding of the benefits and deficiencies of having such a relationship. I won't be supporting this unless it had multiple locations throughout the city that would give us the information I think that is intended by putting this forward, but I just don't think it gives us what it is intended to do.
We're discussing the amendment, and perhaps we can move the amendment along. I suspect people know what they want to do. Councilmember Song.
So what we're neglecting to include here is Planning Commission or the Planning Department. So if we're talking about Hickory Way and Racquet Club and our vote to not approve the waiver for the sidewalk completion extension as part of a greater network, a non-motorized network, I think as a reminder, public sidewalks are required for approved site plans. The installation of sidewalks along the frontage of property considered for any site plan approval. This was triggered by a site plan approval process. It was not arbitrary. It did not come through commissions. This requirement of property expansions and site plan approvals has been implemented by churches, private schools in our community, and this is a different process. So I am not in favor of this amendment. I think there's been community responses. Brett Leonard has been responsive. Our traffic engineers have been responsive. They're in process of actually considering an easement for public access, and I feel like there has already been a petition submitted for this project on that end.
Further discussion? Councilmember Nelson.
I hear the resistance of my colleagues in feeling that it's odd to immediately refer to something to this body, but as I look at the resolution, there isn't actually an agenda for this joint meeting until they start looking at specific situations. So I'm in support of this amendment. It seems completely reasonable to me that having organized a joint meeting of this body, that they could discuss any number of specific situations, and we're simply suggesting one that they start with.
Further discussion? Councilmember Griswold.
I voted against the waiver about a year ago, and while I didn't support putting the sidewalk in, I did state that I had to vote that way because of city policy. Now we have an opportunity to look at our policies and optimize them. And yes, I saw this project just as an example of something we could do. I'm not aware of any other sidewalk projects at this time. I would also like to remind council that sidewalks have become very, very political. A lot of misinformation, a lot of hateful statements were made regarding the Travers sidewalk. And I can tell you that there are 2 prior council members who do not have sidewalks on their property. And I don't want to get into all the details, but we need to start having policies that are consistent with each other and we follow them and stop these silly, dangerous games that we play over sidewalks. We just need a policy. Thank you.
Councilmember Briggs.
So as Councilmember Song has already articulated, we have a commission that works on this. It's the Planning Commission, and that is the body that we charge to bring us forward recommendations. If this is a policy that we would like to evaluate specifically, that's certainly something we could refer to Planning Commission. I do not. When we speak to I guess I will speak a little bit to the larger amendment or larger resolution. In conversations with Councilmember Griswold and staff, my understanding is that there was an issue that was of interest to be discussed around Chapter 40 and vegetation, and so I feel like there is actually something that this group is being called together to examine. However, I would not support this issue.
Further discussion of the amendment? Roll call vote on the amendment, starting with Councilmember Nelson.
Councilmember Nelson?
Yes.
Councilmember Briggs?
No.
Councilmember Mamlawi?
No.
Councilmember Hayner?
No.
Councilmember Dish?
No.
Councilmember Griswold?
Yes.
Councilmember Song?
No.
Councilmember Grand, recused. Councilmember Rodina?
No.
Mayor Taylor?
No.
Councilmember Iyer, absent. Motion fails.
Councilmember Grand, further discussion of the main motion. Councilmember Ramlowy.
Thank you. I just have a question as to why this is narrowly tailored and focused on sidewalks. I understand controlling the workload and managing it, and the need for cross-collaboration amongst our boards and commissions. I do believe there's not enough collaboration, but I think that'll always be the case, unfortunately. There's just limited time and resources. But we are seeing deficiencies in the way we do things. I'm experiencing one currently on Glendale where sidewalk gap installation is not one of the higher priorities, and I feel if we had a collaborative effort at examining how we score filling in our sidewalks and maintaining our sidewalks, we probably would have one that makes more sense for the community. Because community members are baffled at times as to why certain projects are done and others are not. And we have recently adopted many different policies, and we're not consistent, I guess, in the application because of the lack of coordination or understanding, perhaps, or the speed that policies get adopted. I mean, we're really good at putting policies up and supporting them, but you got to backfill them. You got to do the work, and you got to make sure that there's resources and support for them to be successful. It's real easy to pass policies. It's the hard part is fulfilling, and doing the work. And so I will support this. I look forward to seeing what comes of it. And hopefully, again, I guess I need to go back to my original point. Why is it just, namely sidewalks in this case and not more?
Further discussion?
May I answer for staff? I don't know if I have a...
You can speak if you want, but it's on your clock.
Oh, okay, that's fine. It was staff's choice to pick something easy, and so that's why sidewalks were chosen. And I'd like to thank Councilmember Briggs because she mentioned Chapter 40 and the vegetation, and one of our problems is vegetation over sidewalks, blocking crosswalks, and I forgot to bring that up. That's very important. We have had revisions to Chapter 40 that have been with staff for quite some time. It's been a challenge because Chapter 40 impacts so many different areas, and so this type of collaboration between commissioners and staff would be an excellent way of resolving those Chapter 40 issues.
Further discussion? Councilmember Briggs.
So I too thank staff for their work on this resolution. The first resolution, which called for moving the transportation plan and carbon neutrality plan programs under the review of the Environmental Commission, referring them to the Environmental Commission and then staffing them, was quite a shift in how we operate. But this new revised resolution, an attempt to be collaborative with council members. I've spoken with staff. This appears to be, in this, the feedback that we received on our agenda responses, this is going to take, 3 to 4 staff members, 1 to 2 hours of time. It is intended to be a one-time meeting, and it is intended to be a situation where these commissioners are invited to attend the meeting, but it is not a full meeting of all 4 commissions, which would be quite an undertaking in terms of having a productive conversation. So if there's a desire to have a focused conversation around a challenging area of our code for a small period of time, that seems reasonable.
Further discussion? Councilmember Song.
So I'd like to ask, what problem are we trying to solve here? We have commissions that work collaboratively with each other without direction from council. I'll give you a recent example with the Traffic Enforcement Transparency Project. That was an effort between the Police Oversight Commission, Human Rights Commission, Transportation Commission, without our direction. And I think that's the kind of culture we'd like to cultivate here, where we are asking community members to volunteer their time, their expertise, and there's nothing stopping commission chairs from working together. I understand that, I would hope that this isn't, I am not in favor of this resolution. It's convoluted. It's making this assumption that these conversations are not happening within staff, with community, between commissions. We have, and that, if this is what we're going to do, where we're going to belabor and then add additional meetings for sidewalk expansions, the schools are missing in this conversation. We can extend this conversation to the point where we don't do anything, and I'd rather not get to that point. We don't have this review when it came to road expansion. When we talked about adding more miles to the city. I encourage folks to look at the sidewalk gaps, prioritization, and progress on our website. If you take a look at how these sidewalk gaps are being addressed in the plan, the capital investments that we're making, I think it makes more sense. And I bet I am betting that these commissions are already looking at this too, because the volunteers on these commissions are well informed. They follow this work. They follow each other's meetings. For us to ask for this extra effort, which will be extra effort on volunteers and staff, is a bit much. So I am not voting in favor.
Councilmember Briggs.
Yeah, I forgot when I was speaking, I did want to offer an amendment. The final resolved clause, as I communicated to Councilmember Griswold via email, is something I do think should be removed. So it directs the city administrator to evaluate the pros and cons of a liaison between the Transportation and Environmental Commissions. With all due respect to our city administrator, I think that the compositions of our commissions is something that is the purview of council, and also sometimes we get recommendations from commissions themselves. So I don't believe that we need that to be evaluated from the city administrator and take from his precious time.
Is there a second? Second by Councilmember Grand. Discussion? Friendly to the body? That's friendly to the body. Further discussion, the main motion is amended. Councilmember Grand.
Just like to say I'm really torn when I listen to my different colleagues on this. I do feel a little better with the final resolve being removed, because I found troubling as well. It is within the purview of any board or commission. I know in the past conversations and ordinances around vegetation have come, I believe, out of the Environmental Commission, to bring in experts, whether they be from other commissions or committees, to have a subcommittee if they want to look at a particular issue. So if the issue is sidewalks and vegetation, I would rather see that than a resolution from council. Because I don't think it requires this level of oversight. At the same time, I find this to be relatively benign, because it's not mandatory for anyone to participate. So at the end of the day, I'll support it, but I do wish that in the future, if the Environmental Commission or another commission has an issue, that they would instead just follow that more standardized procedure of just forming a subcommittee to talk about it.
Further discussion, the main motion is amended. Roll call vote, please, starting with Councilmember Nelson.
Councilmember Nelson?
Yes.
Councilmember Briggs?
Yes.
Councilmember Mlawi?
Yes.
Councilmember Hayner?
Yes.
Councilmember Dish?
Yes.
Councilmember Griswold?
Yes.
Councilmember Song?
No.
Councilmember Grand?
Yes.
Councilmember Rodina?
Yes.
Mayor Taylor?
Yes.
Councilmember Iyer, absent. Motion carries.
Do we have a closed session today?
Yes, Council and Mayor Taylor, the City Attorney's Office is requesting closed session to discuss 3 matters as follows. K. Jin Lim as trustee for the Chapter 7 bankruptcy estate of David B. Abu versus the City of Ann Arbor, Washtenaw County Circuit Court case number 21-000107-CD. The second matter being an attorney-client privileged legal advice memo provided to counsel relating to a pre-litigation claim against the city. And the third matter being Laidlaw versus the City of Ann Arbor, Washtenaw County Circuit Court case number 22-000327-CZ.
We have a motion, please, to go into session for those purposes. Moved by Councilmember Hayner, second by Councilmember Dish. Discussion? Roll call vote, please, starting with Councilmember Nelson.
Councilmember Nelson?
Yes.
Councilmember Briggs?
Yes.
Councilmember Mlawi?
Yes.
Councilmember Hayner?
Yes.
Councilmember Dish?
Yes.
Councilmember Griswold?
Yes.
Councilmember Song?
Yes.
Councilmember Grand?
Yes.
Councilmember Rodina?
Yes.
Mayor Taylor?
Yes.
Councilmember Iyer, absent. Motion carries.
We're in closed session. Let us reconvene upstairs at the 3rd floor in perhaps 10 minutes. back in open session. May we have before us the clerk's report of communications, petitions, and referrals. May I motion please to approve this clerk's report? Moved by Councilmember Rumlowy, seconded by Councilmember Dish. Discussion? All in favor? Opposed? It's approved. Do we have communications from our city attorney?
No, thank you.
We now come to public comment general time. Public comment general time is an opportunity for members of the public to speak to council and the community about matters of municipal interest. To speak at public comment general time, one need not have signed up in advance. Speakers in all instances will have 3 minutes in which to speak, so please pay close attention to the time. Our clerk will notify you when 30 seconds are remaining. If you're speaking online here in the House, please pay close attention to the lights. In all instances, when your time has expired, please conclude your remarks and cede the floor. Is there anyone in House who would like to speak at public comment? Please come on up.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Evans. I propose that City Council create an ombudsperson's office as a citizen's advocate to evaluate and act upon valid resident complaints against city administrative departments. An ombudsperson is an essential independent agency where residents can affordably file complaints against city maladministration and hold officials accountable for their actions now that most state residents are priced out of Michigan's justice system by legal fees often in excess of $200 per hour. As stated by Michigan Attorney General in her model ethics ordinance, a well-drafted ethics ordinance should, quote unquote, instill trust and faith in government on the part of the public, and she recommends creating an ombudsperson for this important purpose. Since the best examples of the need for an ombudsperson come from real cases, I offer facts from my own family's experience with maladministration within Ann Arbor. I've provided an outline for all of the council members, along with exhibits. Exhibit 1 is a copy of my mother Lola's 2017 building permit application. Because she was told to use a form for 1 and 2 family homes, she made it clear in her application that it was Unit 3 that was being worked on in a 5-unit multifamily home where our family lives. Exhibit 2 contains 4 building permits costing $1,000 issued on Lola's building permit application. Exhibit 3 is an email from a senior city official falsely claiming that the relevant city officials were unaware that the application was for a multifamily home. It supported the improper revocation of Lola's $1,000 permits and refused to renew Lola's rental certificate of compliance, decimating her income because of the contrived revocation of Unit 3 building permits. Exhibit 4 is an affidavit provided by Lola to the City of Ann Arbor at its request, authorizing her grandson Constantine to communicate and work with the city on her behalf. Exhibit 5 contains 2 letters from the senior building official, improperly cutting off communications with Lola's grandson. It ignored Lola's written authorization of her grandson. It violated 91-year-old Lola's right to advocacy and obstructed Lola's effort to renew her rental certificate. Exhibit 8 is a notice of noncompliance posted on Lola's door in January 2021 at the peak of the COVID pandemic, when city officials obstructed Lola's efforts to renew her rental certificate. The wrongful notice caused immediate rental losses at the pandemic's peak and total losses which continue to escalate, currently about $50,000, and causing Lola's income to drop below the poverty line. The notice also undermined Lola's economic and housing security, was posted while the city officials were working from the comfort of their own homes, and City Hall was closed during lockdown. Council, please create an ombudsperson to help end such wrongs. Thank you.
Thank you.
Once upon a time, those who ruled according to the way didn't use it to make people knowing, but to keep them unknowing. People get hard to manage when they know too much. Whoever rules by intellect is a curse upon the land. Whoever rules by ignorance is a blessing on it. To understand these things is to have a pattern and a model, and to understand the pattern and the model is mysterious power. Mysterious power goes deep. It reaches far. It follows things back, clear back to the great oneness. The greatest power is the gift of following the way alone. How the way does things is hard to grasp, elusive. Elusive, yes, hard to grasp, yet there are thoughts in it. Hard to grasp, yes, elusive, yet there are things in it. Hard to make out, yes, and obscure, yet there is spirit in it, veritable spirit. There is certainty in it. From long, long ago till now, it has kept its name. So it saw the beginning of everything. How do I know anything about the beginning? By this.
Thank you.
Hello, Brandon Dimchoff, Ward 4 again. I'm here to announce a new community project to provide more accessible information about the actions of council. It's available now at a2council.vote. Ooh. Many recognize that Legistar is difficult to navigate and it's impossible to see a summary of votes that took place at a council meeting. In fact, Councilmember Nelson has been providing summary information and voting charts for some time. But I think there are two problems with a sitting council member being the provider for this service. First, being a council member is not a permanent position, and at some point, Councilmember Nelson will no longer be on council. This sort of service should outlive the term of any single council member. Second, even though the voting charts and reproduced agendas are factual, they serve as a funnel into the rest of our website, which is filled with propaganda, misinformation, and outright lies. For instance, while attempting to look up the votes for a particular meeting, you might also be presented with such misinformation as insinuations of impropriety directed at a member of city staff, which she has been unwilling to retract, even after being told these insinuations are untrue and harmful to the staff member. Justifications of her no vote on censuring Councilmember Hayner for using racial slurs, saying that he merely had used the phonetic sounds without euphemism. Furthermore, she claims she has received no communications about Hayner's words being harmful, despite there being ample proof that she did. She also has suggestions that her council colleagues might have been bribed, since someone tried to bribe her, apparently, which was alarming enough to use for propaganda purposes, but not alarming enough to actually report to the authorities. Also, there are insinuations that her opponents is participating in an illegal texting operation, including instructions on how to report the text to the FCC. If this is truly illegal, then you might as well report Governor Whitmer, Debbie Dingell, Planned Parenthood, and literally every other Democrat, because wow, do I get a lot of texts from campaigns. She also has made suggestions that if she loses her upcoming election, it'll be because it was bought, and that the voters are so informed and easily manipulated that the loss won't be her fault. We don't find it acceptable that people have to wade through that nonsense in order to access basic data on council actions. In an ideal world, the city would provide this information in a neutral, clear, and easy to digest format. Unfortunately, it really doesn't. Our intent is to fill that gap, giving people access to information about the workings of council without including propaganda. This will be open source. Anyone is welcome to contribute. I hope the city will take it over one day. So you can visit a2council.vote and see the voting chart and only the voting chart for tonight's meeting. Expect to see more in the future. We're just getting started. My contact information is on the site if you'd like more information or to get involved. Thanks. a2council.vote.
Thank you. Ms. Boudry?
Caller with the phone number ending in 556. Do you have a comment? 556, go ahead.
Hi, this is Ralph McKee from the 5th Ward. This meeting, again, illustrates a lack of logical consistency. This one, once again, originating from council members Iyer and Redina. This is about the wage spot check item. The reason given for needing the wage spot checks was to ensure contractor compliance via fear of being caught for non-compliance. Logical enough. Yet these same two council members recently proposed revoking a contract and awarding it, moving it to a different contractor who had failed to disclose safety violations. The argument was made at the time that moving the contract in that way to a contractor who had failed to disclose violations would incentivize contractors to hide or at least be sloppy important disclosures. Council members Iyer and Redina rejected that argument, and so did the majority, voting that contract to award to the contractor who had failed to disclose. Those positions are pretty much essentially irreconcilable. The only way you can reconcile them is maybe they would get to decide in all these cases who to eventually award the contract to. In other words, if someone fails to disclose properly, as long as the council majority likes that contractor, you ignore the failure to disclose. If, on the other hand, if you catch somebody with a failing to properly comply with the prevailing wage ordinance, hey, you just say, well, we like them, so no consequences. That's absurd, but those are the two positions that were taken. They're irreconcilable. The inconsistency is palpable. That's all I have for tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mayor, I don't see any other callers on the line with their hands up.
Seeing no one, the public comment is closed. Can I have other communications from council? Councilmember Griswold.
Yeah, I want to support the idea of having an ombudsperson. I probably spend 50% of my time dealing with constituents who have worked their way up the ladder in terms of staff. Most recently, we had stormwater that was being collected in the street, and the drain was then channeling that water to private property, which was eroding anyway, and it created dangerous situations. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail right now, but I do support that concept, and maybe it would also pay for itself by reducing our legal fees. Secondly, Chapter 40, the vegetation in our community is the worst that it's been in 20 years. So I'm glad that we're going to look at Chapter 40 through this new organization, whatever collaborative group. The third thing I have is I have asked staff, and I'm still waiting for a response. Staff harvested email addresses for the mayor, sent them to his Hooper Hathaway email address along with his government email address. Those were released via a FOIA, so I have access to over 2,000 of those email addresses. And so I'm wondering, may I use those email addresses regardless of how they were obtained, given that they're now out in the public domain? So that's still a question of mine. Thank you.
Councilmember Song.
Okay. I would like to thank Jushay Duckworth and Survivor Speak for organizing the Black Lives mural work 2 weeks ago. Councilmember Redina was out there. Prosecutor Ellie Savitt was out there. A number of community members showed up. 7 a.m. Gallup Park. This was a joint effort with Parks. I can't thank Park staff enough for organizing this in short order. We had folks who were it's right by the playground, the universal access playground that the Rotary Club helped fundraise for. So it was a really great spot to see that happen. People were coming in and jumping in to help paint. It was really moving. We were supposed to have the second installation this past Saturday, but because of weather and illness amongst some of the organizers, we've rescheduled that. We're looking at August 20th, and that will be at Wheeler Park. Ann Arbor can have more than one Black Lives Matter mural, and I'm eager for this. I wanted to thank Councilmember Dish for responding to constituents who are, I think there's some confusion over how our streets are, how our street conditions are rated and assigned for repair. And Councilmember Dish pointed out that there are two programs, the local street resurfacing program and the capital preventive maintenance program. So hopefully we can all get on the same page and letting folks know that there are two coordinated efforts in this end. And then lastly, I wanted to thank Attorney Cower. When the Supreme Court case came down on Roe v. Wade, a number of us had reached out and over concern of what Ann Arbor can do. And Attorney Cower had updated all of us, I believe, in her work on trying to look into this. But I urge folks to also look at Prosecutor Ellie Savitt's work and how he's committed to not further criminalize folks who would like to continue to exercise their right to reproductive freedom as it's been recognized for 50 years. So.
Councilmember Hayner.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. So just a bunch of stuff to run through here. I've actually drafted a resolution to create an Office of the Ombudsperson and expanding on the scope of the state AG's model ethics ordinance. So I want to thank Mr. Soliotis for speaking to that tonight. I agree with him on the need for that. Saturday, July 16th, this last Saturday, was known around the world as Trinity Day, which commemorates the unfortunate testing of the nuclear weapon. I don't believe that Ann Arbor has yet to sign a treaty calling for the prohibition of nuclear weapons, and that's one of those things where people say, well, what good can we do? Well, we can add our name to the list of people who find that abhorrent, and of course the United States is the only nation who has wielded such terrible weapons on others. We throw a lot of stuff around here about A20 and how we're going to solve this, but we do need to really understand that half the global emissions in the world come from just 25 corporations. So as we lean on homeowners and landowners and so on and renters to make these changes to their lives, we have to understand that we're down here clawing at the bottom when the real problem is a corporate one. Finally, I just wanted to comment that I certainly appreciated people's support when I was going through all this notion about my use of racial slurs earlier in my tenure here. I used a racial slur to educate a young reporter about Dick Gregory and Richard Pryor and Paul Mooney and Yoko Ono and James Baldwin and all these people he'd never heard of who had plenty of good things to say about the power of language. And for that to be a headline and to be misconstrued and to be used to try and beat down a council colleague when we could have had a genuine conversation about race here at this table. Instead, we had a conversation about words bad and you're a terrible person for even talking about race. That was the tenor of our conversation at this table, and I think it was a glimpse behind the curtain of what happens here at City Council, that we don't really want to have real conversations about things like race and affordability and the vanishing middle class in our community. So I'll just leave it at that.
Further communication from Council. Councilmember Umlawi.
Thanks. I also, too, want to lend support for an ombudsman program here in Ann Arbor. There's been many instances, I believe this would have been helpful to our community in education and to enhance government services. There's an imbalance of power, and there's many times a conflict of interest, though it might not be a legal conflict of interest, but ethically and in soft power, there are ways that I believe residents cannot get on a level playing field. And so I believe this is something that should be looked into. Hopefully still around after next Tuesday or 2 Tuesdays from today to take it on. There's so much I can say. I don't want to use this as a stump speech here. But I share some of the concerns that my colleague at the other end just talked about, how there isn't space in this political body to have any kind of dissent, any kind of discussion. It needs to be somebody's way or the highway. And if it's not, then you will feel the forces that will try to exclude that political dissension. And that's what I've experienced. That's my experience as a colored person on council, as somebody who doesn't think the way everyone else thinks. Your motives are attacked. You're attacked.
Councilmember?
Your business is attacked. So there's a whole lot of growing up we need. Hopefully that happens.
Further communication from council. Councilmember Grant.
Thank you. I wasn't going to say anything about council communication this evening, but I think the thing I'll miss least about being on city council is being accused on a regular basis of corruption. We had a meeting a couple months ago, and I actually felt like a lightness on my shoulders, and I thought, what was different about tonight? And I realized this was the first meeting in a long time where I actually wasn't accused of personal enrichment by making a decision where I disagreed with someone about a policy. And I've sat at this table in the majority and the minority. I've agreed, I've disagreed. But the conspiracies, the self-victimization, the lack of responsibility, it's shocking to me that we're actually still having these conversations, but we do again and again and again. That word was inexcusable. And to just sit and say that you were educating someone, no. And
let's have a conversation about it.
And when people disagree with you, it's because they have a policy difference, not because you're being marginalized. So if anyone has to grow up, it's not some of my colleagues who figured out how to work together and make ourselves a progressive city that hopefully becomes a safe and welcoming space that we all hopefully aspire to have it be. So that's it. Thank you.
Further communication from council. Councilmember Briggs.
I think this is something, we often try not to repeat each other, but I think sometimes it's worth repeating each other. Councilmember Ramlawi, you said that you feel like there isn't space in this political body for certain things, and there isn't. There is not space in this political body to use the N-word as a council member. Certainly not to educate a young reporter in our community, a young African-American reporter in our community about the use of the N-word. That is not acceptable. We said that as a body that it wasn't acceptable. It continues not to be acceptable, and I'm proud that we said that.
Further communication from council. May I have a motion to adjourn, please? Moved by Councilmember Rodina, seconded by Councilmember Song. Discussion? All in favor? Opposed? We're adjourned.